So Mike, this is R33, is that right?
This is R33 and that is R32.
Oh, okay.
You were right, it's me, my old age.
And these are the last two instruments you've made so far, and maybe the last ever.
No,
is that right?
this is the last instrument I made.
Yeah.
And then in between that, I made an F to F double manual,
Oh, right.
which was FF15.
Yes.
That one's now in Taiwan.
Okay.
I have this rather extraordinary system. They're all based on the same design, basically the same speaking lengths,
Yeah.
which are Ruckers, and plucking points, which are Ruckers, from C to D, or C to C, as it were. And then when I extended and did the petit revelement, went down to G to D, which is the compass I prefer, because I think it's the ideal compass acoustically for a harpsichord.
Yes.
Of course it limits people. I called all the instruments R prefix there, which was, you know, crediting to Ruckers. When I extended to F to F, then I went through a series of calling those FF, and I did 15 of those.
Yes.
And I've done 33 of the G to D.
Yes. And how many singles like this one have you made?
I come off the cuff. Oh, like this. This particular one is a one-off.
Yeah.
Because being the last instrument I made, I did it really out of curiosity.
So is it the first that only has...
I have done 1, 8 and 4 before. There's one at the Royal College of Music. And that is pure Ruckers, 1, 8 and 4. I have made 3 or 4 of those, but this one, of course, I put the 3rd rank of jacks in, the 2nd 8-foot rank of jacks in, plucking the same string.
Can you just show us that? Could you take the jack rail off, so we can actually see that and document it? So the 2 strings per note, 3 rows of jacks.
Yes,
and this is something Ruckers never did, but...
He never did this.
But Couchet who married into the family and carried on
the family, and the last of the
So this is
family.
a kind of post-1650 development of Ruckers.
Yes.
Yeah.
The scaling of these instruments and the plucking points are based on the 1637 single manual in Berlin.
Yeah.
So that choir of 8-foots jacks, this very front one here,
The front 8, as it were, yeah.
They would be the upper manual jacks on a double manual, and they are pure Ruckers.
Yeah.
And then the 4-foot behind it is pure Ruckers. Then the 3rd rank, which is here, plucking the same string in the same direction, is obviously plucking that string a few centimetres away from the authentic Ruckers point. And the reason why I had not done that before was that obviously the demand for my instruments was for basically 2 8s and 4s.
Yeah.
I didn't have the demand for it. So this very last instrument was out of pure curiosity. I knew makers had done it. I mean, several makers have done it.
Yeah.
And I'm quite friendly with Bill Jurgensen in Germany, and he frequently does that sort of thing. So out of curiosity I did it, thinking that I basically didn't think it could work.
But you've made it work in a rather special way.
I made it work. I mean, I did no different to what other makers do. The extraordinary thing about it, which I think you possibly will agree with, is it is the most interesting sound.
Yeah.
The combination of the 2 8-foots plucking simultaneously on the same string is an extraordinary
Could I
thing.
perhaps sit and demonstrate that?
Well, if we put the 2 8s on, then they have to pluck with no separation. Otherwise, if you have any separation, the separation kills the second stroke.
Okay,
but so then you get, that is 2 8-foots plucking together. If we knock that one off, we've got the pure Ruckers 8-foot. Bring it back on again. And you just get that little bit more attack.
So it's almost like having a forked plectrum,
Yes.
if you like.
Yes.
And plucking simultaneously in two different places.
Absolutely. The extraordinary thing, though, which interests me, was most performers and players say that predominantly the fundamental register on the harpsichord is 2/8,
yeah.
the 2 8-foot choirs. I have never really liked the sound of the 2 8-foots in the conventional way of a staggered 2/8. It's either an upper manual and a lower manual playing through coupler, or in a single manual having the two with stagger. I have never really liked the sound of that. I always think there's a slight impurity to it. The 2/8s, when you're plucking the same string, has no impurity. You just get this extra dynamic, which I find quite exciting.
Yes.
Because there's a purity to the sound which I like.
Yeah. Can I perhaps demonstrate a few chords myself?
Yes.
So,
yes.
The
yeah, they'll need to both go the same way.
yeah.
So
That's the that is the Ruckers sound. Reinforce it, as it were, with the other.
Now
that's. But if you use that back one on its own, it's quite nice.
Yes, well that's of course that is not the Ruckers plucking point. That is the back 8 plucking point.
So with a single, it's extraordinary, isn't it? With a single 8-foot set, you've actually got 3 8-foot colours.
Yes, yes.
Which is amazing. Plus, it's actually 6 because for any one of those colours you can also add the buff. And one thing I've learnt from this instrument, particularly with your wonderful style of singing buff, if we can call it that, is that the buff stop no longer seems like a toy effect, it seems like a genuine alternative. And one could almost imagine it using as much, as much as the other buff.
Yes, I've always considered it that.
Yeah.
Which is the reason why I use this technique of using a very, very soft pigskin, split pigskin, that moulds itself around the string, but allows the harpsichord resonance to come through. And yeah, you need to push those.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm just, I'm all right, and I think I'm in command.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, just adding the buff to the Ruckers plucking point, it's very beautiful and delicate. What I've really discovered on this visit in the last couple of days is that with both the double pluck or the both sets of jacks, and it almost produces like a guitar-like sound.
It's a sort of halo,
yes,
which comes. Otherwise, it becomes a little pizzicato sort of stuff. That's what I don't like. I never like that.
But one can play it. One can also, if you want that effect.
Well, you can press the button and get that. Yes, that's right. Yes.
Sorry,
but again, it gives the player the flexibility.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the important.
And then we can add in the 4/4. I think sounds wonderful. wonderful with the buff.
Yeah, again, it is something that I've always liked as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And then, as it were, the tutti sound. That's the double pluck plus the 4/4.
It really is quite a powerful sound,
isn't it?
isn't it? It really has got so much power. And of course, this has helped. Which is another important, a little important detail. This is helped by the fact that you've only got a single choir of strings on both of the bridges. You always get that with the 4/4. It has its own bridge.
Yeah.
Normally on the instruments we make, modern instruments we make today, you've got two 8-foot choirs on the same bridge, and the second 8-foot choir, I've always had the feeling, I know for a fact, it does slightly compress the soundboard. So with this instrument, 1, 8 and 4, you have this lovely open sound, which the spinets do as well. I mean, you posted a rather lovely 1709 spinet, and that had that immediate open sound, because the soundboard is not complicated with a second compression string.
Yeah.
So, really,
but of course, this sort of harpsichord is the end of a Renaissance tradition, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's essentially a mid-16th century type, which the Ruckers continued making.
Absolutely.
Until about 1640, 1650.
Yes, quite.
And immediately those last ones were made, the taste in the sound that was wanted changed. So a lot of them were converted.
That's right. And the French makers like Blanchet, Tasca, came in and did the revival.
So this is essentially an instrument for Renaissance music, but the way you've set it up, I think, is actually more versatile. I think you can play on a lot of later 17th century music on this, and not even 18th century.
Yes, I would agree with that. That's nice of you to say that. I would agree with that. I really do think that the traditional instruments really do not have any limitations. I mean, I agree with you there.
Yeah.
And, well, of course, I suppose, like everything else, the fashion came in. Ruckers never, ever made an instrument with, all these double manual instruments were transposing instruments, and the upper manual on that was a transposing device. It went down the foot.
Yes, exactly.
Again, the double manuals that survive, that Ruckers made, and that are authentic, are strung with that single 8-foot choir and 4-foot choir.
Yes.
It was the revival on the French that when they came in and put the second 8-foot string on that
There's a curious question about those. I don't know if you have an opinion about this. Why did they make them with 4 registers when they could have just made do with the 8 and 4 with a kind of double dogleg system, working from both manuals?
That I can't answer, because basically I have never made an instrument with dogleg jacks, and I've been rather blinkered throughout my 45 years. I've stuck to the Flemish style of instrument, and purely because at the end of my making years, I still had so much to learn. So I thought I didn't really want to get involved in different styles and different periods.
Yes.
It's just a limitation of me. I admire the makers that can chop and change between Italian instruments and Flemish instruments and French instruments and German instruments. I mean, that is a talent on its own. But I'm not that clever, quite honestly.
I don't know if I believe it's a question of cleverness. I think it's your quest for a particular style and sound of harpsichord. I'd like to just ask you, Mike, perhaps wind right back. You trained as a piano man with Broadwoods, and presumably to a high technical level as a piano person.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what brought you into harpsichords in the first place.
Well, going back a long way, and I basically got fed up with restoring pianos. I was never a piano maker. I was apprenticed to Broadwoods, in their repair workshop, doing restoration work and repair work, and as a tuner. And I trained as a tuner, and so I was used to the mechanics of the piano and was trained about that. When I left Broadford's after doing my national service, and I started up a business of my own, literally restoring, doing major restoration work.
But on modern pianos.
On modern pianos, and I got pretty fed up of doing that, because basically all you're doing is you're working with beautiful instruments, and you're working with sort of Steinways and Bosenhoffers and Blüthers and Bechsteins, but you're only restoring other people's work. I wanted to do something of my own, and also my tastes in music were drifting towards Baroque and drifting towards earlier music.
Right.
Now, I had a unique opportunity. I restored a piano, a Blüthner Grand, for Julian Bream, the guitarist and violinist.
Yes.
And
he lives not far from you, I believe.
but it's not very far from here now. But in those days I lived in North Devon, and I restored this instrument for him and got very friendly with Julian. And he had built a workshop for David Rubio, who was then making his guitars and his lutes. And David Rubio was getting interested in harpsichords as well. And he introduced me to David Rubio. And I eventually had the opportunity of taking over the workshop that Bream had built for David Rubio. So that put a little emphasis towards drifting towards earlier keyboard instruments. And once I had this facility of this lovely workshop that Bream had built for David Rubio, I had space and all sorts of, I had the facilities there to develop. And also another stroke of luck, we sold our cottage in North Devon, and for the first time in my life I had money in the bank and didn't owe money. So, and I took a sabbatical of 6 months to design a harpsichord. Very arrogant of me, because I decided I had never seen a harpsichord, a proper harpsichord, but I thought, if I can't design one of these things and build one of these things out of my head, I shouldn't be changing my career in my mid-30s. It was a very arrogant thing to do, but I did do this. I made this harpsichord. Believe it or not, George Markham used it for a couple of concerts. He quite liked it, but it was a horrendous thing with pedals and everything else. It really was just a wooden frame piano that plucked the strings instead of struck the strings with hammers. And I was very fortunate, because Bream obviously had many friends, and amongst his friends was Stephen Dodson and Jane Clark, and they came visiting. And Jane came up to try this harpsichord, and she very politely, kindly suggested that it might be a good idea if I sought out a proper harpsichord and saw how they literally should be made.
But when 2 days ago, when I last saw you, you told me something rather surprising about your relationship with historic instruments. That you haven't actually...
With who?
With historic instruments.
In what way?
Well, you haven't actually seen or been, examined many of them closely.
I've seen very, very few harpsichords. I played... My first introduction to a proper harpsichord was through Michael Thomas, and he had a Nicolai de Gregori Italian harpsichord, which was in need of quite a bit of work, and he said if I could do the work on the harpsichord, get the harpsichord function again, it was an opportunity for me to measure it and draw it and make one similar to it, and he would have that instrument. that I made as well. So that was my first introduction. I made this little Italian. I did eventually make 5 of them, but I didn't particularly enjoy those. The first real harpsichord, what I call a proper harpsichord, which is an absolute gorgeous thing, that I came in touch with was through Tom Goff. Tom Goff got an introduction for me to Mrs. Gilbert Russell to see what was then called the Gouget Tascan. Mm-hmm. It's now been authenticated as being made by Gormans, and Tascan did a little work on it.
Yeah.
And I was able to go and see that instrument before it went to Edinburgh at Mottersford, and I was able to take an impression of it.
So that obviously changed your life.
That completely changed my life. I mean, that was an incredible instrument, and it is the most beautiful instrument. And I must have made an awful lot of those based on that instrument.
And then you, Leonhardt started playing your instruments relatively early in your career. You had a lucky break.
Very early in my career.
And I imagine that meant because that must have done your reputation lot of good, that must have enabled you to continue following a quite individual path.
Well, of course it did. The Leonhardt, I really was an incredible boost to my career. He rang me up one day and asked if he could use one of my instruments at his recital he gives at the Bruges exhibition. I never exhibited at Bruges, and I wasn't exhibiting at Bruges. So I thanked him for it and said, well, I won't be exhibiting. And he said, oh, well, that means then you don't want me to use one of your instruments. And I said, no, not at all. If I can borrow one of an instrument from somewhere, I'd love to bring it over. And that happened. I borrowed an instrument that I'd made for the Bournemouth Sinfonietta, and took it over for just this recital. And believe it or not, it resulted in 5 years' work.
Yes.
So that is the sort of impact that such a player can have on a maker's career, and completely changed my life, really.
Yeah.
And
how would you describe your relation to historic instruments? Because obviously you were making at a time when everybody wanted to play historic instruments, so one was leaving the modern instruments and the piano type instruments behind. But you've told me you've never been concerned to make exact copies, that you're doing.
Yes,
you're entering a slightly more creative relationship with the old builders.
I've never been one that wanted to copy for the sake of copying. I suppose the nearest I got to copying was the Gorman Tascan, but then I was copying in as much there, because I was learning my trade, I was learning my craft. So I was grateful to have had the facility to take this rubbing and measures and this physical contact with an original instrument. But these instruments here that I have spent the last 15 years, or since the year 2000, working with, are really, they're Johnsons.
Yes.
I mean, all I've done is take the plucking point and the speaking length of the great master Ruckers, because I think that is the important factor. Yes. And then I have built, in the Flemish style and tradition, I've designed my whole instrument around that factor.
Yes.
So in no way do I attempt to copy any instrument, such as any Ruckers. So even though the keyboards physically have the same dimensions, not of Ruckers, because Ruckers' octave span was wider than this.
Yeah.
This instrument here, this keyboard you see here, I took that from the Gorman Tascan. They were very short little heads, 35mm heads, very short little keys. and I've kept that for the last 45 years.
It's a lovely keyboard to play. Yeah.
Well, I've always been fascinated by the short heads and some makers the accidentals are longer than mine.
Yeah.
Again, you see, I don't copy, so I build my keyboards. So I think, and hopefully other people agree with me, they cosmetically look balanced, and it's all fairly tidy.
Anyway, perhaps we haven't got an infinite amount of time. You wanted me to say something about these instruments, and I feel very privileged that you've given me an open door for now 3 days. I had 1 day last year and now 2 more days of recording on these fantastic instruments, and I feel I'm only starting to absorb what they are and what their potential is. And the other thing I have to say is that because I've been, for various reasons, kind of out of the scene, I'm not very in touch with actually what other makers have been doing in the last 10, 15 years, so I can't make any kind of comparative comments on these, but they're obviously Rolls-Royce harpsichords. They're things at the very highest level, and they work beautifully. They're very sophisticated, interesting. They don't necessarily immediately seduce you if you just play a chord or two, but immediately you start to make shapes with them. They seem almost to play themselves, and all the kind of shapes one struggles to make as a harpsichordist come out on these, as I put it, in 3D very easily. And I'm sure there are all sorts of technical factors for that, as well as your innate perfectionism, Mike. But a friend of mine, another Facebook friend, we really got to know each other through Facebook, funnily enough, is very interested in these recording sessions and asked me to describe the instruments, and I said it's very difficult to describe because my feeling is they're nothing actually like I've ever played before, and I'm not actually sure, you see, if any Baroque composer would have played instruments that work quite as well as yours. I don't know if that's an absurd kind of remark, because I think what you've done is you've gone in so much detail in the action and got rid of so much noise that it's a much purer sound than we're used to. Now, of course, we can't transport ourselves back then and know exactly what level of craftsmanship there was, but it means that the sound is slightly different. In that sense, they are Johnsons, I think, and not Ruckers, and yet they're very profoundly influenced by Ruckers, and there's a very profound creative relationship, I'd say, between you and Ruckers.
Yeah, I mean, the sound of Ruckers has always been one that's fascinated me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impregnated in my brain, and unfortunately, in 45 years, have not been able to replicate that, not as to my satisfaction. And that is the important factor. My satisfaction, because that is the driving force. I think it's kind of you to say that about the mechanics of the instrument, because I do honestly feel, and I will be frowned upon for making this statement, that quite a lot of early instruments and the crudity of the actions let the instruments down. And over the last 10 years, I have spent a considerable amount of time in thinking and designing such things as jacks and taking all the friction out of keyboards so that there is no friction, and your finger is feeling immediately the jack and the pickup of the jack. And well, obviously you've picked that up over this last 2 days. It's had an effect over you. You found that they are very easy for you to play. The fact of making them easy to play, that is not the major factor. The major factor is to be able, through the action, to give you the facility to be able to focus the sound from your fingers.
Yeah.
And once you get some of the impurities that so many of the early actions had, and I'll be frowned on for this statement, but I feel it, that becomes an obstacle towards the focusing of the sound. So my thought has been to develop that way. Plus the fact that coming from the piano trade, even though I've forgotten those 45 years ago times, I had installed into me from the very word go a discipline.
Yes.
And that discipline has been brought into my harpsichord manufacturing and more importantly, my design. Because I design my actions and I design my keyboards. They're not copies, they're Johnson's.
Yes.
And
they're individually detailed on each instrument.
Absolutely.
The jacks aren't production line.
Absolutely.
Even have your own production line there.
Yes, absolutely.
They're tailored for the
yes, when it comes to
circumstance.
making a rank of jacks, I make a trial, several trials, until I get it doing, that jack doing exactly what I want it to do from that particular instrument. Then I manufacture that rank, and then the next rank, the procedure's gone all over again. So there is a difference between the three ranks of jacks. People buy commercial jacks from jack makers and they're literally all the same. But mine are not. No. They are different because they have been created for that particular choir. That sounds rather arrogant.
Or whatever it is.
But in actual fact, I do that because I do consider that important.
Yeah. Well, it does. It's, perhaps not everybody in the harpsichord world, and there are some very, people with very strong opinions among our friends and colleagues in the harpsichord world. Not everybody will necessarily agree with the course you followed, but
absolutely.
I can certainly say that you're not living in a world of fantasy in doing this. It has very tangible results, and the results I hope will be heard on these recordings I've made.
I can fully understand there is one plan.
And I found particular phrases. I've recorded the 6th partita today of Bach, and it can go to hell of a lick, the corrente on this, the double over here, because in these cascading 30-second notes and so on, I can't quite think of the metaphor, but it's like dice falling out of a cup or something. Everything just kind of happens so easily.
That's wonderful.
Gravity.
That's wonderful, because you see that is the objective of my exercise, to give you that facility.
Yeah.
And I've had this feeling about that there is one player who will be nameless that doesn't like the fact that I have taken a lot of ictus away from the harpsichord jack. I've not tried to eliminate it. I just felt that so much ictus was a loss of energy.
Yeah.
And that energy was needed for you to be able to focus the sound and the instrument to be able to really take on this attack.
Exactly.
So the focal pluck without the ictus gives a different sound. And I can understand some players not being at all happy about that.
Yes.
But then that doesn't worry me, because I could very easily make jacks that make lots of ictus. That's an easy thing to do.
Yes.
It's not very easy to take that away and have it controllable. And I think it's much better. But we've got a 4 on there. We haven't got an 8-foot. There's a lovely pickup of sound and the bloom behind it. You don't want a lot of clack with that. And but that's a personal thing.
Yeah. I love the famous Chopin quote comparing Pleyel and Erhard. I'm sure you're familiar with that, where he said, I think he said it to Erhard, that with an Erhard piano, I like to play an Erhard piano when I'm feeling tired, because the piano makes the sound for me.
Yes.
But when I'm not tired, I prefer my play-el, because on that I can make my own sound. And I feel, comparing where you came from with your big French instruments and where you've arrived in these rather miraculous late fruits, if you like, is that you've moved from the era concept of this wonderful kind of warm bath which you can just luxuriate in, to the play-el idea that you can do whatever you want. You know, you can be completely yourself on
I
this.
hope satisfactorily so. I can fully understand Chopin's statement, because coming from the piano trade, I know exactly what he's talking about. And the Erard, which was basically the fundamental double escapement grand action, which Swander developed from the original concept of Erard, was a wonderful bit of engineering. And it just does a lot of work for you. I don't think quite I've achieved quite that amount of success with a harpsichord action, but I'm encouraged that you found them fairly nice to play.
Well, what thing you said to me earlier on is rather lovely and typically modest, that you see your position in the harpsichord world as being part of an evolution, and you've taken the instrument to a certain point, but then somebody else could take it further.
Yeah, I do think
it's hard to imagine at this moment, because I can't imagine anybody with quite your devotion and combined with experience.
Well, of course, somebody will, and all we do I've been privileged because I've had 45 years of a career making musical instruments for institutions and for professional players, and for the concert platform, and that's a marvellous privilege. But you see, all you do when you develop, and that's what I have done, I've developed certain aspects of the harpsichord's physical manufacture. All you're doing is hopefully setting some standards, and somebody's going to come along and do it a damn sight better than you. I have a friend that always refers to the fact that you can't reinvent the wheel. Well, you can't reinvent the wheel, but you can help the thing work a little bit easier if you put a bit of imagination to it. And that's all I've done. And I can understand that not everybody is going to agree with what I've done. That's not a point. That's not important to me.
Do you think anybody might accuse you, because I think in certain areas of the early music world there's a very moral kind of feeling connected with authenticity, which personally I don't like, and I can imagine some people might say, well, actually you've come full circle and you're kind of making modern instruments, in the sense that an instrument like this never existed in the past.
I think I am making modern instruments. I have no fault with that. I am making modern instruments, but with the greatest respect, and I mean this with sincerity, for the Ruckers family and what they achieved. I quite honestly hope that I'm making satisfactory musical instruments, but it'll be interesting to see whether they mature over the next 200, 250 years, because I'm pretty certain they will survive, because I can say with arrogance they've been manufactured to a standard that they will live 200 years. And it'll be interesting to see whether, when the timbers have had that amount of maturity under the strains and the tensions that are there, produce this rather beautiful quality of sound that Ruckers instruments do produce. And I also do, with great respect, admire the work of some purists, because you know that on that instrument there, it is strung with this new wire, which is...
Yes, we haven't talked about the wire. Perhaps you'd like to move to the double and talk a little bit about the wire. I know Michael's taking me to the...
shall we move
the train before too long, but let's, while we're going...
Well, This instrument is, both the instruments are strung with Stephen Burkett's P wire, which is phosphor wire. Stephen Burkett has spent the last 12 years of his life researching the formulas that were used to manufacture the original wires of the 16th and 17th century and early 18th century. And he's achieved wonderful excellence with the iron wire. And both of these are strung with that, but this instrument is quite unique in as much as it has the bass strings, the brass strings and the red brass strings are from one of the first ingots that he's manufactured, and taking his research into brass and red brass. And it's completely changed the character of this instrument, and it's quite an extraordinary development. We have iron there, and now we're going into brass, and there is literally no change, and you have this wonderful sonority. And then we get down to here. That's the last of the brass. Now listen to this, the first of the red brass. That is incredible, an incredible sound. And for years, makers have been saying, makers that have used a lot of red brass, I've never had much faith in the red brass, have been saying, oh, it needs time to mature. You don't, it's a dull sound when you put it on. And, give it 6 months. There's nothing dull about that. And that was only put on 3 weeks ago. And I'm tremendously excited about that.
Yes.
And Stephen Burkett's work, to me, is quite fantastic. So,
yes, well, it is wonderful, and perhaps we should cut it short now, Mike, and I'll just finish off and play. I've recorded today not the entire third order of Couperin, but most of it. I don't think you have to play every movement of these Book 1 suites, and I thought perhaps I'd just finish off with I'll play the first and last movement without repeats, which show off the two aspects of this this double, which are so impressive. La Ténébreuse, which is all using the bass register, of course, and I think sounds glorious on the 2/8. And then in the second half, I'll go up onto the upper manual, which, as you say, uses the Ruckers plucking points.
Yes, yeah,
and most wonderful upper manual sound on this instrument. And then I'll probably make some mistakes playing it live on camera, but the last movement, which Couperin marks très vivement et marqué, la lutine. So very fast and marked, and I mean, I'm not sure I can quite play it as fast as the instrument would allow it to. My technique isn't, somebody like Jean Rondeau, who has a real virtuoso technique, who has a Franz Liszt of the harpsichord. I'm not that sort of person, but could probably play it, 10% faster than I can. But anyway, La Ténébreuse. Problem is, it encourages you to be melodramatic because you can do such big gestures with it, this harpsichord tonight. So, La Lutine, 4 foot.
Wow. Wow.
Thank you, Mike. What an
Thank
amazing
you.
thing.
Thank you.
And
Good.
we should have it in London so that everybody can come and see it
No, that'd be
for a
nice.
while.
Yeah.
It should have a season in London.
Right.
We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about
Yeah.
it. Ah. We're going to get you on the tray.